The tricky thing about DLC is determining its value in comparison to the base game. Do we expect 30 hours of new gameplay, new locations? Do we want new weapons, new skins? Should the DLC be standalone, or should it weave in the base game narrative? Should players have to beat the base game before playing the DLC content? And how often do players and publishers agree on the content's price tag? For context, let's look at 3 major RPGs and how each of those publishers determine the value of their DLC expansions. First, we have 2006's The Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion by Bethesda. So the Bethesda team released Knights of the Nine, which cost $9.99 and featured a new faction alongside new quests. They followed Knights of the Nine with a $30 second expansion called Shivering Isles. And Shivering Isles added more than 30 hours of new gameplay content and a new location called Sheogorath.
In 2015, CD Projekt Red released their critically acclaimed fantasy RPG, The Witcher 3. The Witcher 3 had 2 major expansions. The first expansion, Hearts of Stone, and it only costs $9.99 with a gameplay length of about 10 hours. While their second expansion, Blood and Wine, cost $19.99 and added a new region, about 20 to 35 hours of new content. Fast forward to the present, and we have Blizzard's Diablo 4. The Diablo team released their first expansion, Vessel of Hatred. Vessel of Hatred introduces a new class called Spiritborn, as well as a new region. And the cost of Vessel of Hatred is a whopping $39.99. Woo! So with that framework in mind, we can start to get an idea for the wide range of DLC expansions and how each can differ in price, gameplay length, and overall content offerings.
Right. So like we were kind of listening to some of my research being shocked and kind of confused at the price of DLC. We don't remember it being that expensive. I know it's for me, it's just because I buy Game of the Year editions on sale. Like if I'm not covering a game, Witcher 3, I think I paid $9.99 for the Game of the Year edition. I just had all the DLC. And so this is the tricky thing about DLC is $40 an insane amount, or is that just the fair price tag for a year's worth of development with a AAA studio? So timing is everything. In 2020, Cyberpunk 2077 released to harsh criticism, largely due to its lofty advertising and marketing campaigns, which fans and reviewers felt oversold the performance and scope of the base game. But 3 years later, CD Projekt Red released Cyberpunk's one and only expansion, Phantom Liberty. Phantom Liberty transformed the entire game and ultimately restored the relationship of the developer with their fan base. So typically, you'll see expansions released around the 1 year mark after the base game. In Cyberpunk's case, it took 3 years to develop Phantom Liberty. In Bethesda's case, they released Starfield in September of 2023, and a year later, Shattered Space, the game's first expansion, came out in late September of 2024.
Okay, so Spencer, do you prefer yearly drops of content, or do you like to see developers take their time to create larger, a more transformative expansion?
I think we're seeing RPGs being treated like a live service, meaning the developers are balancing free updates with paid expansions. So $40 is a lot to ask for after 1 year, in my opinion. I'm not sure that I always feel ready to spend $40 after spending $70 on a base game that I might not have beaten yet. Yeah. So there's this issue of playing catch up, but there's a tension because I don't want to miss out or feel like I'm experiencing like old gameplay. So for me, Shattered Space came out at the perfect time, but Vessel of Hatred feels a little too soon for me, only because Diablo 4's seasonal model seems to already introduce like all of these updates that I find it harder to keep up with in general. So I'll still intend to play Vessel of Hatred, but I'm not sure it's as much of a no-brainer as the competition. How do you feel about this?
Like, well, at the end of the day, I will wait. I will wait for really good content. I definitely go back to what we just talked about with Phantom Liberty. I was so disappointed when the base game dropped, but I was one of those fans that with the new updates, slowly rolling out the bug fixes, the changes to the base game, and then eventually the DLC with I think it's like 2.0 dropped with it as well. I was like, this is finally the game I always wanted as an cyberpunk RPG experience. It is epic. And so I don't care that I had to wait, 3 years post launch. I don't care about that. They delivered, and I'm so happy. And that's a game I will go back, and I'm pretty sure we will eventually go back to together as well. If in terms of releasing it right away when it's fresh, I get the incentive with that. I get like why that's good, but I've just been so burned by bad DLC, and but then like healed by good. So it's good that we're talking about this today.
So while we're talking about timelines, how long does it usually take you to get to that sweet spot of an RPG? So I'm using Shattered Spaces as an example, but I kind of feel this is the same for me with Fallout 4. Level 35 is kind of what I'm hovering around as I think about where you want to be for a DLC. So it seems like expansions like for players to be pretty well leveled before entering a new game. How do you feel about that approach? Like, do you if we want to jump into DLC that transforms a game, but we're new to it, we have to first spend that time getting to level 35. Does that bother you? Is that okay?
I think that's appropriate. I think DLC is definitely should be made for players who've played the game. Why should it be made for new players? That makes no sense for me. It should be rewarding the customers that have already played, that showed that they want to pay into this, buy this game, and now like here's some more because you love this game. And I think about like The Witcher 3 and Ghost of Tsushima. Both DLCs I've absolutely loved and played the crap ton out of. Witcher 3, they also have just done so well at giving you the ability to start their expansions, their DLC with already level 35 Geralt. So you don't have to actually play through the 30, 40 hour base game to just get to the DLC. I recommend it because the base game's so fun and it's going to add to your DLC experience. But, if you did want to just come in as a new player and play that, they did have that option, which is really cool. For Ghost of Tsushima, they built in the ability to get to their DLC after you beat Act 1 and enter into Act 2. Yes, is the skill difficulty a huge spike? Totally. And I found myself dying a lot. But in a way, because I've played so much Ghost of Tsushima, I'm a seasoned player, and I'm actually, I don't mean to toot my own horn, but I can hold my own on lethal mode. And so having that extra spike in difficulty was just a new challenge, and it was pretty fun to just, after Act 1, get into Act 2 and go straight to DLC and try to fit it in with the story in Act 2. It adds that level of interest of where can I cleverly fit the components of this DLC, which I guess technically happened post game, but have they made it in a way that fits in with the story? Because they made it available just in Act 2. They did. And so I figured out a really nice sweet spot to fit that DLC within the base game, which is totally fun for me.
I don't know if this happens to you, but when you play a game that already has expansions built into it, like Dragon's Dogma, it's funny when you play it and you get those prompts like an island is awaiting you, a secret message. Whenever I see that, I kind of see that as almost like a spoiler, and I'm directing my experience, and it's like, no, Spencer, you don't know about that yet. That's ahead. That's for, like you said, that's for the players who earned it. You just got here, chill out for a second, and they're like, are you sure you don't want to check the frequency, a new whatever? I'm like, I'm just trying to get accustomed to the normal meal here. I'm not ready for dessert yet. And so I appreciate when games let me know when I'm about to taste the dessert.
Yes.
And I think the level cap helps with that a little bit. It's like, hey, just so you know, this is recommended for players level 35. And that helps me because I go, oh, shoot, I didn't want to see that part yet. Because I kind of want to simulate what people who first played this experience. Like, I want to see what the base game is and then go to the DLC. And I think a cool way around that is what you mentioned with Cyberpunk 2077, which is that 2.0 update. It's like evolving the game for all players, to making the tweaks you're going to make. And so that way you can put the new location behind a little bit of a wall for them to access through a threshold. But the great work you've done in the updates is available for everyone. And there will be those silly things that happens with like Vampire Survivors, where you don't have the DLC, you're playing the game, and it's like you update it, and now all of a sudden there's all these new achievements and there's all this stuff. And it's like it's a push and pull of, it's a live service, so you were trying to complete the base game, but they keep adding these free updates that keep extending that carrot further and further and further. And it's like, I'm telling Mo, like, beat the game before they put out another free update. Cause like, at least with the DLC, we could choose to purchase the DLC and be like, okay, now here's a new set of achievements. We chose to walk through that door. Mm-hmm. There is that free update tension. You know, Diablo 4, I mentioned that. There's so many updates. It's like, wow, I have a lot to catch up on, a lot of content before I even get to the expansion. So there's a tension there, but I do appreciate it. Like giving the free players who just bought the base game those core updates. So that way they're at least experiencing what the expansion players experience from a build perspective. But yeah, sure, maybe they're not gonna be able to go to that new campaign or that new area yet. So speaking of going into the DLC, experiencing that,
right?
We were talking, I don't know why this came up, but we were thinking about side quests, like specifically, how many side quests are appropriate? Because you and I, we don't like to mainline DLC. Yeah.
So Spencer, what do you think is the right amount of side quests for DLC?
For me, it's I know it's too much, and that's Nuka World Fallout 4. So I describe it as a labyrinth of quests where you're like, okay, I'm telling Mo, like, I think I'm finally finished with this DLC. And then it's like, oh, but there's this thing over here. Is this tying into the main? Is this not? And it's great if you've already beat the game and there's nothing else for you to do but that huge DLC. But if you're coming in late and you're inheriting all of these DLCs and they're each like 25 hours, then you're kind of thinking, wow, this is a lot of content. So I think that the Outer Worlds DLCs are paced really well. I love a big DLC. I don't ever want to complain about a DLC that's too big. But when stuff gets into, you know, the Bethesda lane of Fallout 4 asking you to build more settlements to beat a DLC, that's where it's too many. It's like, okay, that's too much. Like, I don't want to engage in that type of gameplay. What about for you? Do any DLCs come into mind where you're like, ooh, that was a good amount of side quests?
Well, I do understand what you're saying about like the quantity of DLC, and it could be a bit daunting. I mean, for this reason, you know, I love base game Witcher. I've played so much of it. I've even played enough to be able to play on Death March, the hardest difficulty, and I still have not beaten the DLC for Witcher 3. And no matter how much someone has said it's so good, you gotta play it. I've only played parts of it. And yeah, I think part of that reason why I haven't beaten it, or there's two sides of the coin, is I don't want Witcher 3 to end ever for me. Totally.
That's super relatable.
So I'm thankful that there's so much that I haven't done, but then also the other side of the coin is like, all right, like, you know, by the time the reason why I haven't really finished Witcher 3 is because by the time I get to the DLC, you know, again, I'm like 40 plus hours into Witcher 3, and by that time for me, you know, a new game has come out. Maybe my brothers are playing another game, getting me sucked into that. And so then I just start forgetting that Witcher story. And I think in my head, oh man, I really want the full impact of the DLC. I want to be able to remember the story that I experienced in the base game fully, so I can see how that one line that I said there fits into this one line over here. I love all that stuff. And like even like TV shows like The Walking Dead, how does the first season relate to the last season? And so I do want to try and binge things, but at some point you're like, man, this is just so much to binge. So I totally get what you're saying, how some things, it could feel a little long. I think there is a sweet spot, and I think I've yet to discover it, though.
Well, we were talking about Skyrim. So for me, I played base game Skyrim. I think I've accidentally experienced the DLC on the Nintendo Switch version, a little bit of it. I need to go and like actually see what is considered DLC and what isn't. But for you played Dawnguard in 2012. Did you go out and buy it on PC? Was it like Steam download? Did you download it from the PlayStation Store or Xbox Store?
So I was one of the guys suffering with Skyrim with PlayStation 3 port, I believe.
I did that too.
And so I think that's where I downloaded the Dawnguard DLC, and I was so stoked for that. And kind of a guilty pleasure, but the reason why I was so stoked for that is I was getting off of watching Vampire Diaries. Have you seen that show, Spencer?
I had a song in Vampire Diaries.
Oh, wait, I remembered this and I was so stoked. Twisted American Girl, right?
I think I maybe 2, because I know Now You Know was in there, but I think Twisted American Girl was in Pretty Little Liars. So
no, that was in Pretty Little Liars.
Vampire Diaries, there was a character going to get blood from a refrigerator, and like it was my song being like, oh, this guy's so cool, and he like grabbed it and he's like, all right, let's go and like work out or something. I don't know what the scene was about.
Funny,
but I was a part of the hyping up the vampires vibes.
Yes. Well, you hyped me up, dude. My sister and I loved that show, and I got a little bit of that. What if I was a vampire, or where's my vampire romance? And I totally got that with Serena and Dawnguard. It was such a fun game, and it just made me think, wow, just a vampire hunter story in a Bethesda game world universe that could stand on its own. They could make their own Castlevania-esque kind of game, and I would play that. They did so well with Dawnguard. It wasn't too long, it wasn't too short, and there was enough I guess additions and gameplay and loot and in location for me, where I just felt like this fits in so well with the Norse mythology and just the Skyrim in general. It was kind of one of, I always go back to saying like it's one of the most perfect DLCs for me.
Right. Well, I love talking about DLC, and I think we both learned stuff. We learned that Bethesda has always charged a pretty good price. I mean, let's look before we leave. Let's see what Dawnguard costs.
Yes.
Dawnguard release date and cost. So Dawnguard was $20 at the time.
Okay.
So yeah,
ooh,
I think
that's pretty steep for back then. Because we think about inflation now, but I guess Bethesda's always been on that expensive side. Because what's the price now for Shattered Space?
Shattered Space is $30, I want to say.
Okay, so they went up a whole $10. I guess that makes sense with 30. Inflation, but it always has felt so expensive. Now, are you enjoying your time with Shattered Space right now?
I'm loving it, and I'm nervous because if you guys know me, I kind of tune out stuff that I'm covering unless it's like a casual conversation, because I don't want it to color how I talk about it. Like if I'm having a great time, I don't want to turn negative because I've heard about someone else's bad time. But of course I can pick up on general vibes, and I know the general vibe on Shattered Space is bad, but I'm loving it, and I'm falling more in love with Starfield as a game because of it, because I don't feel overwhelmed. I don't feel like there's too much content. I feel like it came out at the right time. I feel like I'm awake. I'm conscious to see what the expansion brings in, as opposed to playing a Game of the Year edition where it's just all thrown in at once. It just feels like one cohesive game. Right. I'm able to like read the new chapter and know what's new. So in that capacity, I'm enjoying it. But maybe later in the game, I will have some negative thoughts about it. But so far, the weapons that it's introducing, I sent you a video of the sword. Yes. Like the Varun weapons are really cool. It's more alien, which I've always wanted from Shattered Space, or I guess Starfield. So yeah, so far I'm really enjoying it. I think it's won me over the more I play it, the more that I'm in the combat. It doesn't have enough alien horror so far, but it does improve the combat, which the combat to me has always been its strength of Starfield. Right. And you just get better when you play DLC because you have tougher enemies. So you're like, wait, how do I have these powers mapped? Oh, I didn't even realize I had that power. And like, I've now mapped a power that shoots like this energy burst. So I have this sword and this like energy thing. And I was kind of thinking, is it my fault that I haven't been playing this game in a more fun gameplay way? Like, am I just getting better and making it better for myself? You know,
think
I'm my
you're
own
becoming
creative director.
You're becoming the Space Witcher that we were talking about last time.
Yeah, exactly. Like, yeah, it's very Space Jedi also. It's like, it's very Luke Skywalker coded,
That's cool.
you know? But yeah, I mean, Mo laughed out loud. Like, I was infiltrating a base and I like have this dope rifle called Hard Shot, I think. And I zoomed in really close and this guy was like walking and there was this oil tanker. I just shot the oil tanker and it exploded. And he was like on fire, like moving around. And Mo like laughed because she was like, wow, that's like, that was crazy. And that's the part about Starfield that I think people miss is like, there is a sandbox combat element where you can do a lot of cool, crazy things in combat. And you have to enjoy that part of the game to, I think, get the most out of it. So it's not going to be Baldur's Gate 3 or Cyberpunk. It's going to be like a combat sandbox and a settlement sandbox. So think of it as like a really elevated Borderlands. It's like, it's Borderlands. You're going into dungeons, you're unlocking stuff. It's Diablo 4. It's not, you know, CD Projekt Red and Larian Studios. It's not that. So I think that's important to have in mind when you're playing Starfield.
Right. I think that's really true. Even when we go back to like Oblivion and Skyrim, that's part of the charm. It's like the goofy gamer charm, you know? And we still want that, but in a more modern way, right?
Totally.
And so it's interesting to hear about how it is being portrayed in Starfield.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys for watching the tricky thing about DLC on Tactically Sound. I am the Yeti Den, and of course, joined as always by Jumby Jumbois, where it's spelled JUMBYJUMBWA.
You got it.
Head to Jumby Jumbo's channel, subscribe on the Yeti Den, and we will be back with more Tactically Sound, more RPG content. So we will see you guys next time. Later.
Oh,